Bruce Wayne again with another story. Now, remember when I mentioned to you that I lived at 49 Miami Drive in Independence City, which is a town inside of the parish. So Independence City is in Portmore, which in Portmore is in St. Catherine. St. Catherine is the parish. For those living in the United States, a parish is similar to a state. And so Portmore is the city, and then Independence City is the town. So we moved from Miami Drive, where we lived in Independence City, and we moved to Edgewater. Now, Edgewater was a cool beach town, and so we had a really cool living there. We had all the typical things. It was an upper middle class neighborhood. We had, just to give you kind of a layout of back then, we had air conditioning in the houses. The neighborhood was middle class. We had 10-speed bikes, I remember. I remember when my brother Colin getting his first 10-speed bike. We had remote control cars that would drive up against the wall, and then they'd, sensors would hit the wall, and then they would drive away. I had a little mixer truck that would just be turned on, and the things would, would move around inside the mixer itself because it was transparent. Interesting that I remember that years later. I had to probably be about 6 years old by then. And interestingly enough, back then, your parents would send you to catch the bus, not the school bus, but the regular bus in the morning at 6 years old. And it was completely safe, so you'd walk to the bus stop, get on the bus and go to school, and then get off the bus and come home. And we never really had any problems with kidnapping or anything like that. It was a pretty safe neighborhood. Now, as far as a couple of stories, remember we still had the tenant from my last story. I mentioned that we had my mother took care of 4 people as a caretaker in another wing of our house. So that business continued from Independence City to when we moved to Edgewater. And so one of the things I remember was, we were boys, we were impish little kids getting in trouble. And so I remember sneaking into, I was not the only one who did this, but we were pranksters. So we'd sneak into Henry's room while Henry, who has Down syndrome, by the way, but he was older. He seemed like he was a grown-up at the time. He was probably about 40 years old. But he was sleeping, and we'd sneak into his room and pour water in his mouth. And then we'd go, "Wake up, Henry, wake up!" And then Henry would wake up and go, and then, of course, when he swallowed, we'd giggle and run out of the room laughing. And of course, well, I upped my game because one day I rolled some paper up, and then I stuck it in his mouth, and I'm sitting there trying to light it on fire because I wanted him to look like he was smoking. Which now I'd probably be in some homes for troubled kids at that point. Now, we also had a couple of kids in the neighborhood, and they were Wayne and Neil. They were the Mirandas, and the Mirandas lived maybe about 3 or 4 houses from where we were. And Zadie, or David Miranda, was a professional cyclist, as in bicycle riding, and so he had a stationary bike that he trained on. I think he was training to compete. He was very well known in Jamaica at the time. And so he had 2 kids, Wayne and Neil, and they were both, Wayne was missing 1 finger and Neil was missing 2 fingers, just the tips of their fingers. And the story is that when the father was on the bike and he's training, and all these, back in the day, though, it's not like these stationary bikes that we have right now that doesn't have spokes in them. Back then, the stationary bikes that you were training on actually had spokes in them. And so while the father was there training, on the bike, Neil, the younger brother, stuck his brother's finger, Wayne, in his index finger in the spokes, and it instantly chopped off his finger, the tip of it, and just reflexively grabbed this brother and stuck his hand in there, and it chopped off both the tips of both fingers. So both of them were missing fingers as well. Now, another thing that, if you may be wondering, why did I've never been drunk or high, and I've never smoked in my life. And the reason why I didn't smoke is because my father used to wake us up. He was a chain smoker, and he used to wake my brother Wayne and Colin up and he used to send them to go get cigarettes at 2 a.m. in the morning. So here are these young boys, and they're getting woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning, and they have to walk like a couple of miles to the only store. He always seemed to know which store was open at that time of the night, and he would send them out there to go get cigarettes at 2 o'clock in the morning and bring it back home. So of course, you know, they didn't seem like it was a pleasurable thing. It wasn't like a fun trip for them to do it when you're waking up young boys basically to go out that time of the night. So that had a negative impact on me, and we never really none of us smoked because of that. One of the things though that I remember very clearly about my father is that he actually used to sneak us off to the movies on a weeknight. And when we went to the movie screen was sort of Technicolor was just coming into form, and so the screen was kind of reddish in color when you watched it, the movies. But I remember watching, Western movies as well, and some of the earlier movies like Bud Spencer and Terrence Hill, and also Clint Eastwood movies as well. I believe that's what we watched, like Hang 'em High. I don't remember, but I remember that those are the style of movies that we watched back then. So those are my stories from 49 Miami Drive in Independence City. It was a beach town, and Hellshire Beach, by the way, was close by to there. So Hellshire Beach is where people would go to swim, but there's also one of the things in Jamaica at the time was called crabbing. So it's just getting crabs that you eat. And the difference between most Americans, we're used to ocean crabs, and the ocean crabs are kind of much more flatter, in the shape of them. But the crabs in Jamaica are much more denser. They're thicker up top, and they have these big claws, and they live they live close to the beach, and so you'd see lots of holes next to the beach, and whenever there was a storm, their holes would get flooded. And when their holes got flooded, then, they got out of the holes. And so this was it was called crab season. When the rain season came, and you could just go and get crabs. And so what would happen is that these guys would get these burlap sacks, and during a storm season, and they'd go down to the beach, and it's like they'll grab them, throw them in the bag as they're running out of there, or go to any swampy areas and just grab the crabs and throw them in there. And I remember one of the times that my father, he knitted this net. It's like he had chicken wire, and he framed it into this trough, kind of a chicken wire netting system. And so they went into this mud hole area there, I remember, and he just drove it through there like a scoop, and when he came up, there was just like shrimp and fish, and it was just crazy how abundant it was. There's so much fish and shrimp and mudfish and stuff like that. And so we, one of the times though they went out, I was not with them that day, and they were out scooping stuff, and Wayne had a rip in his shorts, and so he just was scooping stuff into his crotch here and throwing them in the bucket. But one of the times when he scooped it, he actually scooped an eel, and so the eel was gonna fuck him up. And so he actually, so he's wrestling with the eel, and he's called my dad, and then he throws it on the ground. My dad chopped it with a machete, because all Jamaicans had machetes back then. So he chopped it up, and then before you know it, that eel was hanging on the line, drying out, and we also ate them. But what I remember about that time was just the abundance of seafood, because back then people did not have washing machines per se. At least we didn't. I know that washing machines were available, but we didn't have one. I know that my aunt who lived in Bridgeport had one, but we didn't have one. And so my mother would wash the clothes out back. There's a wash tub everybody had, and you'd wash by hand out there, which is a lot of work washing clothes with 5 kids, especially 5 boys, 4 boys, 1 girl. But I remember that tub, and it was a really good sized tub. I remember that my father, when they would go fishing, they'd come in and they'd throw all the crabs in shrimp, and the crabs, there'd be so many of them that they're trying to climb out of that area there. And they're pushing them back down in there while they have a pot on the stove boiling so that they can put the crabs in there. And even though we have a refrigerator, because there was such an abundance of crabs, I also remember them doing something very interesting, which is you could, the ice truck would come by and you had these big, huge slabs of ice. And then what you would do is you would dig a hole, and then you would put sawdust around there, I guess as an insulator, and then you drop that block of ice in there, and then you cover the whole thing up and bury it. And that actually kept the ice from melting, which is very interesting back then. Now I know it probably was because of the insulation that did that. But those are some of the stories that I remember back at 49 Miami Drive in Independence City. One of the other things that I remember was that Wayne, my brother, he was a phenomenal swimmer. And so he would go out anytime we'd go to the beach, which we ventured a lot because it was very close to our home. You would just see a little dot of him that's out there because he'd be so far out there and just completely fearless. And so we had lots of beach adventures out there, and I'll tell you about that in our next episode. Thank you for listening. Also, don't forget to check out my app, Easy Weight Loss. Don't forget, I'm Bruce Wayne, the fitness guy, and I've helped thousands of people all across the world to lose weight and get in fantastic shape.